I tell people, I look out my window now and I see people walking their dog and I put myself in their shoes and I go, God, that must be so great just to walk your dog down the street. What a pleasurable thing. They don't realize it. You take it for granted now. Please don't take it for granted. Understand that the ability that you have now to run, to walk your dog, to swim, to type, it can be taken away from you, and just appreciate your life for what you have.
In 2018, you had a stroke, and that changed your life in a very fundamental way. Can you tell me what happened and how it changed you?
Well, it was a terrifying experience. I was in a coma. I emerged from it, and suddenly, I'm somebody who's very physical. Sports was a huge part of my life. I would swim very long distances. I love mountain biking. I was doing all kinds of hiking. It was extremely important to me. Every single day I did something physical to take my mind off things. Suddenly it's taken away from me. The left side of my body is basically paralyzed. I have no control over it. To this day, I still have problems with it. Can't swim, can't mountain bike, can't hike, right? I can't take my mind, I can't think while I'm taking a hike. I can't type for a writer. That's not much fun. I had to deal with crap that I've never had to deal with in my life. I had a pretty easy time compared to this. I had to learn new life skills when I'm already 62 years old, That isn't easy stuff. I don't want to whine or complain because people deal with worse stuff all the time. A lot of people get cancer, etc. But it's this, anybody who's had a stroke knows what I'm talking about. It's very hard because you can practice and practice and practice and practice hours and hours of therapy. I do over an hour of therapy every day, and you hardly notice any results. The frustration, it takes you 10 minutes to tie your shoes. You can't button your thing. You have to get other people to do that. It's hard to cut food. You have to be patient. You have to accept this. You have to find another way of loving your life, of accepting these things that you took for granted before. And I tell people, I look out my window now where I'm writing and I see people walking their dog and I put myself in their shoes and I go, God, that must be so great just to walk your dog down the street. What a pleasurable thing. They don't realize it. You take it for granted now. Please don't take it for granted. Understand that the ability that you have now to run, to walk your dog, to swim, to type, it can be taken away from you. And just appreciate your life for what you have, because the things that I love were taken away from me and I wish they hadn't been. So I've had to adjust myself.
When something like that happens in life, when you are the victim of a tragedy or instance or circumstance or something that happens, there's often a degree of unfairness surrounding it. And when I read about that incident in 2018, I read that it was a bee sting that caused a clot that caused the stroke.
Yeah, I know. It's actually, I think, a wasp. But if that wasp had been like moving, the wind had been a little different and had moved this way instead of this way, I may not have had a stroke. But I can tell you this. So in May of that year, the stroke was in August. In May, I'd finished The Laws of Human Nature, which took me 5 years. And when I finished that book, I felt like I was near death. I was so exhausted. I was so drained. My wife was really worried about me because I just looked really haggard. Slowly, I kind of recovered. But then in July, I went to New York and I forgot my blood pressure medication that I'd take. So my blood pressure was starting to rise. And then I came back to LA and I walked in this park and the wasp stung me here. And my whole chest turned red and it was like the most unbearable feeling. So I went to the hospital. They gave me this drug called prednisone to relieve the itching. Prednisone increases your blood pressure. And so when I ended up having the stroke, the blood clot, it was right where the wasp sting was. So the neurologist said, probably all this cholesterol was released from that from that wasp sting here, and that's where the blood clot occurred, okay? But there were all these other circumstances that kind of led to it, a kind of a perfect storm. And maybe If I hadn't had that wasp sting, it would have happened 4 months later under different circumstances, and I would have died. Because what happened was I was driving my car when I got my stroke. My wife was in the other seat. She saw something really strange going on my face. I didn't notice it. She forced me to pull over the side of the road. 90% of the time I'm alone. I'm swimming, I'm hiking, I'm driving. Could have happened 4 months from then. She wouldn't be there. I'd be dead right now. So I can't really think in terms of, oh, if that wasp had been diverted. It would be a good feeling, but it's too painful for me to imagine. I like to think of, fortunately, someone was there who saved my life, because it could have very well happened 4 months from then, because my body was worn down and something much worse could have happened.
That journey you described of having to rebuild and relearn and redesign your life, we've talked about the topic of power so much in this conversation. In that moment, it sounds like your power, to some degree, had been taken from you.
You know, you learn, like, at least for me, when I looked at people differently after my stroke. I had more empathy for them. I'm normally an empathetic person, but I was looking at people who in the pandemic who got long COVID, who were having strokes or were having terrible circumstances, or when I look at people who were disabled, because I'm essentially disabled now, I understand them. And also the other thing is, when I look at people who are really poor, who are struggling in life, they feel really dependent and helpless. I felt that physically. I don't feel that materially because I don't have that problem anymore, thank God. But I have more empathy. I understand it, not in an intellectual way, but in a visceral, physical way. That sensation of, I don't know where my food's coming from. I don't know what's going to happen the next day. I'm weak, I'm dependent, I'm helpless. It's miserable. I kind of understood that feeling now on a different level, on a level that affected me personally, and it's a lot different than having it affect you in an intellectual way.
The phases in that journey to where you are today, the first phase after the incident, you wake up, you realize that your life has changed. What's going on in your psychology? What's going on in your mind? You talked about helplessness and depression.
Well, to be honest with you, what happened to me was, right afterwards, there was a level of delusion in my mind. I kept thinking, well, in 3 months, I'll be back at it. In 6 months, I'll be swimming. In a year, I'll be hiking again. I wasn't aware of how hard the process was. And then 6 months, 8 months, a year down the road, as I realized I was wrong, that's when the depression set in. That's when it really started hitting me. I thought I'd be back. Here I am 4 years on. I thought I'd be back to my life, but I'm not. So that's what was the hardest struggle, was actually a year in there and going, there's a phase where you kind of plateau, where you're not really progressing anymore. That's the worst part of it. I'm progressing now again because I have a great therapist, but I had to deal with really bad depression about a year and a half in, when it started to realize, this is my life, man. I'm going to always have this funny arm that's bowing in. I'm going to be walking like this. I never expected this in my life. So I've had to deal with that, and I've had to kind of find a way to not let it get me down, to find other pleasures and joys in life, etc., which I have.